Today is July 1st, 2011. I'm Marty Dick, and I'm interviewing Steve Stratton, who is a Sunshine resident for the past 10 years and who is a firefighter and was very active in the fire on Labor Day 2010.
Right.
There are so many questions that I could ask you that I'm going to let you make the decisions of what you'd like to talk about.
Okay.
That you think that people in the long run, your grandchildren and eras past, future, would like to know and ought to know about the fire.
Sure. I should just dive in, huh?
You should just dive in. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think where I want to start is I'm not a Colorado native. I was born in Ohio, lived in Ohio almost all my life, and in about 1997, 98, things changed in my life, went through a divorce, my kids were getting older, I kind of had a freedom to move around. So I made a list. I went on the internet. The internet was new then. I went on the internet and I made a list of 32 cities that had more than 300 days of sunshine a year and were in areas that I thought I might want to live in, either in the mountains, in the desert, or on a coast where there was water. Boulder was not one of those 32 cities, but I went to every one of these 32 cities over a year and a half period, and to try and figure out where I wanted to live. I didn't like any of them. I went everywhere. I went, well, I'm not going to go. That's my fire pager. Sorry. So this is our fire weather report that we get every morning. And it's going to be a nice day, but it's a red flag day, so we could have fire today, meaning it's going to be a little windy, a little hot, a little dry, all at the same time. So, sorry.
Nope.
So Boulder was not on the list. I went to all of these cities, beaches and deserts and mountains, like I said, and I don't know, just none of them rang my bell. And I came home and I was pretty discouraged because I really wanted to leave Ohio. I needed more sunshine. I just thought there were better places to live. And a friend of mine said, I know you pretty well, and I think the perfect city for you is Boulder, Colorado. Have you ever been there? I said, no, I've never been there. And I go to Colorado to ski all the time, but I've never been to Boulder. You have to go to Boulder. Well, okay. I haven't found what I wanted yet, so... So I got on an airplane and I flew to Boulder on a Friday afternoon, and I bought a house on Sunday. Now, I wasn't planning to buy a house. I thought, well, if I find a town, I'll research it and I'll maybe take a year. And maybe in a year I could move. Well, I bought a house 2 days later, and I found a realtor who went through the closing for me, and I found myself with 2 houses and I was in a panic. So after 3 months, I packed up and moved to Boulder. And I lived in town. I lived on Pine Street for a year and a half, but I really, really wanted to live in the mountains. And so that was in '98 that I moved here. By 2000, I'd found a house up in Sunshine. We call it Sunshine Canyon. It's not really Sunshine Canyon. It's the old town site of Sunshine, which is not actually in the Sunshine Canyon, but nonetheless. So we're about 6 miles west of Boulder, and I loved living up here. Instantly, it was just the people were great, the weather was great, the mountains were great, and it never occurred to me, not even once did it ever occur to me that forest fire was an issue. I set the woods in the back of my house when I was a kid on fire once, and the volunteer firefighters came and put it out, and I was embarrassed. I never gave a thought to who these guys were who put out this fire. I was sure glad they showed up. And so when I moved to the mountains, I knew that there was a thing called wildfire, and I And I knew that there were areas of the country that really had to deal with it. The South, you know, California, places like that. It never occurred to me. And I think that's a dilemma that a lot of people who move up into the mountains they don't realize that they are accepting a pretty significant level of danger. Maybe not danger to themselves. I mean, certainly there's the possibility that somebody could get injured or killed in a wildfire. That certainly happens. But that's pretty rare for a homeowner to go through that, unless they do some really stupid things. But to lose everything you have, clearly that's a very strong possibility. And I believe now much stronger than I thought at the time. Luckily, I didn't lose anything in the fire. Oh, I lost a bunch of trees. But I didn't lose my home and I didn't lose my possessions. But as soon as I moved up here, the very first little community event I went to, the current fire chief came up to me and introduced himself and, of course, invited me to join the fire department. That's standard operating procedure for a fire chief. You see a new warm body, you try to get him to join the fire department. And I had never even considered that. And I thought of that for the first time, and I thought, well, I'm not really into fighting fire so much, but it would be a great way to get to know my neighbors, and I would really like to get to know my neighbors. So I started going to the, fire trainings. And about the first fire training, somebody said, well, you're going to have to do some real training. You're going to have to go to fire academy and go to do this, do this, do this. Oh, really? So I did all those things. And after about a year of doing all those things, the fire chief came up to me and said, well, you're now the most qualified guy in our fire department because nobody's done all these trainings and we think you ought to be fire chief. Well, so it took a few more months. I became assistant fire chief, and then I think in 2002 I became fire chief.
Excuse me, Steve, but had you ever been on the fire?
Prior to being fire chief?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. During those first year or two, I got pretty active, and that's kind of what I do. I'm kind of a single issue guy. I grab a hold of something and I just go with it to the exclusion of almost everything else, and that's kind of what I did. I became a certified firefighter in the state of Colorado and got my red card to be on wildfires and worked my way up through engine boss and all, there are several different federal standards, and I started working on all those. And I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't the fighting the fires that I really enjoyed. It was being with the people. Mm-hmm. And I really got to know my neighbors. I mean, I lived on Pine Street in Boulder, and I didn't know any of my neighbors. I knew the guy next door and the lady next door, but there was really no neighborhood camaraderie. I moved to Sunshine, and instantly I'm a part of a community. Mm-hmm. At the time, I couldn't see anybody else's house from my house. There were a lot of trees back then. A lot of those trees are gone now. But it was much, and is still today, much more of a community. I mean, I know, particularly after being fire chief, I know virtually everybody up here. And I really, really enjoy that. And I really enjoy that everybody is so different. It's a really eclectic community. There are, Sunshine's a little bit unique in that it's kind of a cross culture. There are people that have been up here for a long time, and they're in the mountains because they want to be left alone. They don't have a whole lot of money, and they like it that way. And they live in little cabins in the woods, and they just as soon you leave them alone most of the time. And then you have other people, they're quite gentrified group of people that are rather well off, independent, build larger houses. And those two communities, in a way, kind of clash, and I really like it. That, there are different opinions about everything, and I really enjoy that about Boulder in general and about Sunshine in particular. So I was fire chief. Like I said, I got to know everybody in the Sunshine area. I instituted doing trainings. We pooled our fire trainings with the adjacent fire districts, the Fourmile Fire District and the Gold Hill Fire District in particular. So we got to know those crews really well, and in fact we got to work together so well. It was like one bigger fire department rather than three separate ones. So that was really enjoyable. And my years as chief, I would have to say so far in my life have been my most enjoyable years. Really, they were a lot. It was a lot of work, but I really enjoyed the connection it gave me. 7 years. Had 7 years as fire chief. I would like to say, but can't really say it, but I'm going to anyway, that if I'd still been fire chief, maybe the fire wouldn't have happened. I don't think that's true. I retired as fire chief about a year before the Fourmile Fire happened on September 6th, 2010. So when the fire occurred, I was not fire chief. I really was no more than a rank and file firefighter. So I responded to the fire like virtually all the other firefighters would have responded. So on that Monday morning, I was at home. It was a holiday, Labor Day. I think it was just a little after 9:30 in the morning, and I got a page that clearly, you know, it's funny. Well, you just saw my pager here. It's funny how you can instantly tell whether it's a real emergency or it's not. I don't know if the dispatchers type differently or what they do, but it was instantly obvious to me that we had a real fire. So I immediately turned on my radio so I could hear the traffic. And I turned it on just in time to actually hear the individual it was at his house when the fire started. He happened to be a firefighter, and he was calling in the fire himself, and he was panicked. And I know this individual really well, and he was over the top. So it was clear we had a major, major problem. And the conditions outside, it was a lot like today, a red flag day, only it was much more windy. It was the perfect day for there not to be a fire, you know. And I know from my fire experiences, you look at the dates when there are big fires, and you look at the dates when there is big fire behavior type weather, they always coincide. And that was the situation this day. So I responded, like I said, like every other firefighter. I went to the fire station. I was mildly, I wouldn't say panicked, but my adrenaline level was at the top. I'm running around, you know, I got all my fire gear in one place, so I'm grabbing it and getting ready, but my wife is like, what can I do to help you, dear? Come on, what? You know, and I'm like, you know, just leave me alone and let me go to the fire. So we had a little run in there, you know, that was a little difficult, but I eventually got to the fire station, and I got there just as one of our fire trucks was leaving. The operating procedure is you go to the fire station and you wait until you have a full crew to man a truck, and then you go. So they had just gotten a crew of 4 in our biggest truck right before I'd gotten there. So the plan was for me to wait. However, having been fire chief, that was a different protocol than I was used to. You know, as fire chief, I just get in my truck and go to the fire because the object is to get a command person on scene as soon as possible. So I weighed the situation knowing that there were already going to be several fire trucks, apparatus we call them, on the fire scene. And the fire scene was not in our fire district, it was down in Fourmile, you know, the valley below Sunshine. There was nobody else there to put a crew together with, so I chose to just drive my truck and follow the fire truck so that I would be able to help organize the response when we got there. I knew that they would need more overhead people, so that's what I chose to do. I followed the truck. We got to a staging area close to where the fire had started. We could not see the fire. We could hear it. We could smell it. The wind was carrying it up above us on the ridge a bit, but the fire was not crazy yet. So we had this little staging area, and I helped organize that a little bit. and we were there, I don't know, this is probably around 10 o'clock in the morning by the time we got there, and we were there just a few minutes when an engine came from the fire and grabbed me to be an engine boss for their engine, to actually run the pump on the engine, and we were sent to the Wall Street, Fourmile Wall Street fire station, which is just down the road from where the fire was. There's a pond right next to that fire station, and our job was to pump water from that pond to fire trucks that would pull in to get reloaded with water, and then they would go to the fire. It took us, I would say, 10, 15 minutes to get set up to do that. We filled one truck, and by 10:20 or so, we were given the call to evacuate. And we could see that the fire on the ridge above us, in front of us, had started to burn. The wind had picked up considerably. Actually, I don't know if the wind picked up, but the fire got up higher on the ridge, so where it got into more wind, and then it really started to carry. Now, I didn't feel particularly in danger at that moment, even though it was getting smoky and we could see the fire above us, and in a few minutes we became aware that we actually had fire behind us also on the opposite ridge. So that's when we weren't really scared, but we knew that there was potential for us to get boxed in by the fire, and we agreed it was time to leave. But we were ordered to leave, and so we were packing up and in a pretty big hurry, grabbing our hose and leaving. And we went to a staging area at the end of Wall Street and Gold Run Road, 4 Mile. And there was kind of a traffic jam there as people were trying to get in and the rest of us were trying to get out. But that got sorted out. We all ended up, well, not all of us, I guess the group kind of broke into halves. The fire had, by the time we got there, the fire had already progressed and was on its way up Gold Run to Gold Hill. And Gold Hill fire chief, the Gold Hill firefighters were on their way down to the fire in 4 Mile, and they ran into the fire, turned around, went back to Gold Hill, got on the radio and called somewhat frantically for fire resources. So half of the people, I would say, that were at that confluence down at Wall Street went on up to Gold Hill, and half went on in toward Boulder to a staging area. We went into Boulder. That's what we were instructed to do. We actually went to Poor Man Road first, which was the first staging area that was decided on. We were only there a few more minutes when that was changed to go to the Justice Center as the staging area. The Poor Man site was really a good site. You could see a lot of the fire. You could get a pretty good overview of what it was doing. It was pretty impressive. But the overhead, the person that was stationed there, made the decision that that was an unsafe place to be, even though we were several miles from the fire. So we went to the staging area at the Justice Center. And then the most frustrating thing happened. We sat at the staging area for hours, waiting for an assignment. I would say this was probably, by the time we got there, it might have been close to 11 o'clock in the morning. And we sat in that staging area for 2.5 hours. I think it was probably 1:30 by the time we actually got an assignment. I would say there were probably 20 fire apparatus there waiting for assignment. No one received an assignment until after 1 o'clock. And what was going on was there was a transition of command of the fire. And you know, I should probably explain a little bit how this command thing works, because it it really came into play in this particular fire. Whenever there's a fire that occurs, particularly in the mountains, but pretty much anywhere in Boulder County, the fire protection district in which the fire is responds. And if they need more help, they ask for more help. If it's obvious on the radio that this is a big fire and is going to cross boundaries outside of that fire protection district, then the county pretty much is automatically alerted, and it is expected that the county will take over a fire that moves from one district to another or has the potential to move to another district. Actually, in the state of Colorado, the law gives the sheriff the responsibility to oversee all larger fires. And if the sheriff deduces that the fire is beyond the capability of the local fire department, then he can take over the fire if he desires and coordinates with the fire chief. So that's what was expected on this fire, and that's pretty much what happened. But because the fire was in the mountains, communication was difficult. Fourmile Canyon, that whole fire district, a lot of it, a radio signal just doesn't get out of the canyon very well. And so the fire chief at the time, who was the incident commander, was at where the fire started, and we could not always hear him. The county resources could not always hear him. So he needed to be moving out, which he was. But that whole communication thing was a real problem in the beginning. But the fire was almost immediately turned over to the county. But I would say from 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock, it was my observation that there was no one in charge of the fire. Now, that's not unreasonable because the fire was moving so quickly. We were moving from what we call an initial response, going to the fire as soon as it started and trying to knock it down right away, to realizing, oh, this is more than we can handle. And a fire that's more than 4.5 feet high, a flame length, is considered more than you can handle, dealing with it a direct response. You need more water, more engines, more people in order to stay safe. So this was beyond our capability almost immediately. So we were all retreating, pulling away from the fire, and that's what's to be expected. That's part of the plan. But during that time, I don't really believe that there was anyone who was directing the response. I don't believe there was a good ability to keep track of what resources were there, what firefighters were already there, what fire trucks were there. And the fire moved so quickly that it was just a matter of staying safe. And so the 2 hours or so between 11 and 1 o'clock during the fire were basically consumed with the county putting together their instant command structure, which they established at the Justice Center, and trying to deduce what resources were available and how they were going to fight this fire, and where the fire was, how it was moving. So they had a task. And I don't think they were actually able to do that until after 1 o'clock. And so they put together a couple, what we call task forces of engines, fire trucks. Our truck was assigned, a Sunshine truck with 4 firefighters in it, was assigned to go with 7 other trucks and to proceed to Gold Hill via Sunshine Canyon Drive through the Sunshine Fire District. 8 other trucks were also sent, and I believe they went up Fourmile Canyon Drive up to Gold Hill. There was on the radio a large impression that Gold Hill was about to be burned completely. And so the county made, I think, what was a reasonable response, and they virtually sent all resources to Gold Hill. Well, the result was that we all went to Gold Hill, and Gold Hill's not a big place. There were more fire trucks and more people there than could fit in Gold Hill, and so it became a real traffic jam. This traffic jam ended up occurring just as the fire was arriving, and so most of us never received a fire assignment. We spent the entire afternoon just moving around, waiting for an assignment. And that was extremely, extremely frustrating. And because our group of trucks had traveled through Sunshine, by the time we got through there, we didn't get our assignment till 1:30. We didn't probably get moving until 2 o'clock. We didn't get up through Sunshine till about 2:30, I would say, and no, maybe around 3 o'clock. And it was obvious that Sunshine was about to be overburned. we actually drove through it just as the flames were starting to come up from Salina below Sunshine. And it was pretty clear to me, though it didn't seem to be clear to anybody else. Not that I knew something nobody else knew, but I didn't see anybody taking any action, and I wasn't in a position of authority. I was just a firefighter, so I was taking orders from somebody else. That Sunshine was being totally ignored, and we were just sent on to Gold Hill. Gold Hill had their own issues. They had plenty of people there to do whatever could be done. And as we sat in Gold Hill, still waiting for an assignment, you know, I looked back over my shoulder and just saw this orange glow over Sunshine. And I remember going to the safety officer. You know, there's a incident command structure, and the safety officer is one of 4 people that report directly to the incident commander. And the safety officer happened to be there, which was really unusual because it's a big fire already. And I went to him and I pleaded that he call incident command and get resources sent to Sunshine. He got on the radio and told them, but there was no response. I mean, they didn't send any resources. So the guys in our truck, we talked about it. We were out of district. We were from Sunshine. We felt a strong need to go to Sunshine because that was our district. We also were pretty much aware that none of the Sunshine firefighters were in our district. There were no firefighters in our district because we'd all responded outside of our district, expecting that the county would send other resources to backfill for us, which they did not. So we decided we were going to break from our job and go to Sunshine, which is not a cool thing to do. I mean, that's not in protocol. It's not allowed. It's called freelancing, and we were in no case supposed to do that. I guess maybe because I had been fire chief for 7 years, perhaps I was a bit arrogant, I don't know, but my attitude was, well, you know, damn these guys, we're going to go to where our fire district is. So I went, you know, I talked to the guys in our crew. I went to our crew boss who was in charge of us. I informed him that he ought to release us, and if he didn't release us, we were going to go anyway. So we didn't freelance. We didn't just leave and not tell him. And he gave us permission to leave. You know, I have to say, at the time, they were trying to get everybody out of Gold Hill because fire was about to hit there, it appeared. So he was happy to have us leave. And I think right after we left, he told all the rest of our task force to also leave. So we left. We started to go climb the hill to go over Butzel Mountain to get to, actually Bighorn Mountain between Butzel and Bighorn, to go back to Sunshine. We got halfway up the hill. The black smoke and the orange glow was so intense, we stopped, and we actually had a little discussion in the truck. The 4 of us, we literally took 2 minutes to discuss whether we should continue up the road. And we decided it was way too dangerous. We didn't even have to see the fire to know that it was way too dangerous. And there was nothing we would be able to do. The only thing that would probably happen is we could get trapped up there. So we turned around, went down Lick Skillet Road, took left-hand Canyon Road back into Boulder, and then came up the east side of Sunshine Canyon Drive to the fire. We were fully aware that there were no firefighters in Sunshine. In fact, as we were making that turn to turn around and go back down Lick Skillet, we got our first tone for a structure that was on fire in Sunshine. That must have been, I'm thinking, and this is just my impression, I'm thinking that that was around 4:30, 4:15 in the afternoon, something like that. And that makes sense based on talking to people who were still evacuating at that time. The house that ended up being on fire at that moment was the house of our current fire chief at the time. He was still on the fire at its point of origin down on Wall Street, did not know that the fire was in Sunshine, did not know that his house was on fire. dispatch called and asked for a response to that fire. I knew that there were no Sunshine firefighters capable of responding. We were all out of district. And I reported on the radio to dispatch that no firefighters from Sunshine were capable of responding. They responded with, okay. I asked them to send other resources, and they said there were no other resources available, and no one was dispatched to Sunshine. Now, I knew that the other resources were available. I just came from Gold Hill, where there were at least 25 fire trucks sitting there doing nothing. There were other fire trucks there that were doing a lot, but I knew that there were just, maybe a couple dozen fire trucks that had just been released from Gold Hill, but dispatch didn't know that, and that was extremely frustrating. They were clearly overwhelmed at the county level, and I wasn't surprised by that, but I was very disappointed. And so it was clear that there was no voice in Sunshine. There was nobody to report what was going on there. There was nobody to ask for resources. So we doubled our effort to get there. So we came up Sunshine Canyon Drive, actually Mapleton Avenue in Boulder, which turns into Sunshine Canyon Drive. And we proceeded up into the Seven Hills area, where we met an engine from Boulder Rural Fire Department. Boulder Rural, we've worked with quite a lot. They're adjacent to us to the south, east of Sunshine, and part of their district is the lower portion. Actually, their district includes the actual Sunshine Canyon, what we call Lower Sunshine. So we met them. They told us they had just withdrawn from our district because of the fire, that they had a couple resources sitting at Bald Mountain, and that we should not proceed beyond where we were. We could help them evacuate people, so we checked for about, I'd say 45 minutes, we checked all the houses in Seven Hills to make sure there was nobody in those homes. We had no reason to believe the fire was not going to come that far. After that, we proceeded on up to Bald Mountain, and that was about 5 o'clock. Now that I think about that, that was right at 5 o'clock we got to Bald Mountain, in time to watch the slurry bombers drop slurry under the outlining areas of Sunshine. That, combined with the wind that stopped. I mean, the wind dramatically came to an end right around 5 o'clock. That probably has more to do with the reason the fire didn't proceed into Boulder Heights, Pine Brook Hills. That, along with the slurry that was dropped, really, really helped.
How strong was that wind?
The wind was, I've heard lots of people say what it was. I experienced winds probably around 30 to 35 knots. Firefighters don't talk in knots usually, so probably 20 to 25 miles an hour, roughly. I've heard it reported higher. It certainly felt higher at times. I can tell you this, that it was purely a wind-driven fire. I mean, you could literally see flames jump from one peak over a valley, over homes, and light up the forest on the opposite peak. I mean, we watched that happen from Bald Mountain. We could see the fire go from Sunshine Canyon Drive, blow over the top of the old town site of Sunshine, and then light off Lee Hill Mountain on the south side of Lee Hill. And the slurry bombers were dropping slurry on Lee Hill to keep that fire from going over the top. And there were firefighters from the Boulder Mountain Fire District that were at the top that were fighting that fire. And because the wind had just died down, they were able to be in front of the fire and to do some work that really was helpful there to help in their district. So it wasn't really until after 5 o'clock, probably 5:15, we started to work with Boulder Rural, and we came up with a plan to work the rest of our fire district. By 5:30, we had a plan. The wind had settled down. The whole area became extremely smoky. I mean, it was like the worst fog you could imagine. So as we And our fire truck was the very first truck to go past Bald Mountain and actually go into the Sunshine, the old town site area of Sunshine. There had been a couple command vehicles that had gone in before us, but we were the first firefighters to actually fight fire in there. And it was dangerous in that you couldn't see anything. At one point we were, creeping down Sunshine Canyon Drive when power lines smashed into our windshield. There were power lines down across the road. Luckily, we knew that all the power had been turned off at around 10:15 in the morning, so we weren't concerned about that hazard. But, so a couple times we had to get out of the way and pull wires either up or down so we could get through. We couldn't really tell what was burning because the smoke was so thick. And we could see large flames through the smoke. We could tell many homes had been burned. And the homes we could tell that were burned were totally gone. Now, these were homes that were totally extinguished. I mean, they were obliterated in an hour, maybe 45 minutes of time. So this was an incredible fire. Usually a house takes hours to burn. This was not the case on this particular day. So we wound our way through the Sunshine District, and our assignment was to not leave the road and to not go further from our truck than our fire hose could carry. So we went to each individual house to see which houses could still be saved. Basically, we were on triage duty. And we used the water we had. I mean, we didn't have very much, we had a small brush truck with a couple hundred gallons of water. So we were sparing with our water, and we just knocked down flames that were close to homes. We actually didn't find any homes that were being immediately threatened any longer. So we cleared out around some houses, things that could possibly burn, and we knocked back some smaller fire to make sure that houses that weren't burned yet weren't going to. I think we went to most of the houses in the district. There were a few houses we would not go to because they were just too dangerous. We were unwilling to go down long driveways that we knew we couldn't turn around in. We didn't go down long driveways that had large fire on them, and there were a few of those. So there were a few houses we didn't go to. I'm confident that no more houses burned on Monday once our crew came in. Now, there were only 3 fire trucks in Sunshine that whole first day, which was really disappointing. Like I said, there were a couple dozen in Gold Hill, probably a dozen or more in Fourmile, I don't actually know, and 3 fire trucks in Sunshine, and that was really disheartening. But I have to say, even though the county fire effort failed in my books on that first Monday, I don't believe any other houses were lost as a result. Later that night, however, after midnight, that's not the case. After midnight, there were so few fire resources on the fire that there were many houses lost, both in Sunshine and in Fourmile, because there were just not firefighters there to put out the fire. Fire was very fightable, the wind was not extreme, so a small, relatively small creeping fire took several houses in Sunshine. I'm estimating 6 to 7 more houses burned after midnight on Monday night, simply because there weren't firefighters there to keep that from happening. That was really disheartening.
How many houses were lost on Monday?
Boy, I don't know how many houses were lost on Monday. Overall, in Sunshine, there were 54 homes lost, and I would estimate about a 1 square mile area of the Sunshine Fire Protection District only. The sheriff says 169 homes burned in the entire Fourmile fire, which included portions of Sugarloaf Fire District, Fourmile Fire District, Gold Hill, and Sunshine. No real fire got into the Boulder Mountain Fire District, though those firefighters were able to fight some fire right on their as it was entering their district. So 169 homes, according to the sheriff, burned in the whole fire. I personally counted 54 homes that burned in Sunshine. The sheriff's count is 56. And there were a few outbuildings and several other things that burned.
Let's take a break here. We're back to an interview with Steve Stratton. I'm Marty Dick, and I'm the interviewer. Megan Bowes is the videographer, and the film is being done for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program at the Carnegie Library.
Continuing. So as I was saying, that we had quite a number of homes that burned in Sunshine. But the question you ask, how many burned on Monday, nobody knew, and nobody knew all week long what had burned. Of course, evacuations happened not immediately, but about the middle of the day on Monday. The sheriff sent out pages and sent out, in fact, I was first aware of the evacuation in Sunshine when I got it on my pager. In Boulder County, you can go online and ask for pages. I got it both on my fire pager and on my telephone. Ironically, I actually had phone service while I was on the fire down in Fourmile in the morning, which I don't usually have in Sunshine. And that's how I found out that Sunshine was being evacuated. The power had been turned off, things like that. So from the time everyone in Sunshine, and the rest of the fire too, evacuated, there was really no method of knowing, gee, did my house burn? Is my house burning now? What is going on? I had this dilemma. On Monday night, as we came, in the fire truck that I was in, we came into Sunshine. It included going past my house. My house was still there. There was large fire right next to it between my house and the next house. We passed that by to go on up Whispering Pines, which is the road I live on, to see what fire was on up there. There was no other fire up further up the road. Ironically, all the rest of the houses up the road burned later that night. But when we were there at 10, 11 o'clock at night on that first day, Monday, there was no fire at the end of Whispering Pines. There was big fire next to my house, and so as we came back out, we stopped, pulled hose, and knocked that fire down. There was a little cabin there that I'm sure would have burned. We were able to save that, and we knocked down the fire that was threatening my house. But as we were doing that, a big wall of flames came further up from the canyon, and we had to leave. So I was convinced when I left my house at 11 o'clock on Monday night that it was burning. There were many people in my situation. There were firefighters that were on the fire that were pretty sure their houses were burning and were not able to go see because they were busy. They had other things to do. So just like me, everybody else who was not on the fire had no way of knowing what was burning, what wasn't. So through the week, before I go on with what happened later in the week, Monday night we were released because the county became aware that there were not going to be enough resources the following day. So they released many firefighters to get a good night's sleep, quote unquote, so we could come back early in the morning and pick up another shift the next day. I was so upset leaving on Monday night. I assumed my house was burning, that I kind of went into this self-protection mode. I told my wife when I met up with her that night around midnight, I'm not going back on the fire. Our house is gone, and we need to go into income protection mode. I'm self-employed, and I was in the peak of my work season, and so I did not go on the fire the rest of the week until Thursday. Because I had clients to deal with, and I just decided I was beside myself. I didn't know how to go fight the fire when I had lost everything. Well, the next morning, around 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, I got a cell phone call from firefighters that my house was still there. And I actually think, in talking to firefighters over that week, that my house continued to be there through the week because firefighters just kept patrolling the road and knocking down the fire as it arrived. Sorry to say that on early Tuesday morning there weren't enough firefighters to do that through some of the areas in Sunshine, and several houses were lost. So on Tuesday, Wednesday, and the first half of Thursday, I was not on the fire, but because I had been fire chief, I got myriad of calls from people in the district wanting to know if I had seen their house, what the conditions were. And I told people what I knew from Monday, but I also knew from talking to firefighters that what I saw on Monday and what was still standing on Tuesday and Wednesday could be totally different. The sheriff was trying, with the help of federal firefighters, were trying to assess what had burned, what was still there, and they were unsuccessful at that. They were unable to deduce how many houses there actually were, where they were, and which ones had burned and which ones hadn't. The reason for that is actually not a surprise. The mountain maps for Boulder County are not terribly accurate. There are houses up here that the tax assessor doesn't know about, off-the-grid houses. There are houses that have different house numbers than the county believes they have. And so the only people who really know that their neighborhoods are the fire districts. And so I had just in the previous years done a whole mapping of the district, and I knew where every house was, and I had confirmed all the addresses. So it became pretty obvious to me that in order to get an accurate count, somebody needed to go in and actually assess. So on Thursday afternoon, I went back to the fire, and I met with the overhead crew in Sunshine, explained to them what I wanted to do. They gave me permission to do that, and I actually went to every house or every house site in the Sunshine Fire District to confirm what had burned and what hadn't. That took me Thursday afternoon and Friday morning, and then on Friday afternoon I emailed out what I think was, except for one or two issues with house numbers, I think was a pretty accurate list. And people were able to know for the first time whether their house was really there. And I had people argue with me that, no, I know, I just talked to so-and-so and they saw my house. And I said, I stood in your living room in your house and there's no floor. You know, things like that. And other people who were convinced their houses were gone. I saw my house burning on TV. I'm sorry, but I was just there 3 hours ago and your house is fine. So that really seemed to help a lot of people. They seemed to get for the first time, be able to emotionally start to deal with what was there or what wasn't. So, you know, and it was at that point that I really started to, for the first time through the fire, started to get a grip with what had happened, what the actual loss was, and that this was going to be a catastrophic loss emotionally for our neighborhood. And since that time, you know, that's what I have observed. It has been a catastrophe for Sunshine. You know, no one was killed. We only lost things, and virtually everybody, you know, is coming to grips with that in one way or another. Of course, there are those who lost their homes, and many of them, you know, here we are, the beginning of July after the fire in September, and most people who lost their homes are just now settling with their insurance companies. Insurance companies have not been terribly friendly through this. You know, it seems to me that if you're paying for full coverage, replacement cost on your policy, and everything you have burns, and the agent comes and sees that everything is burned, they ought to just write you a check for your policy limit. but that's not what they do usually. Now, there were some cases where they did that, but it's been a real ordeal, and it really, some people who lost their homes would argue that dealing with the insurance company and the settlement of the loss has been the most difficult and emotional part of dealing with the fire. All of those people don't live in sunshine anymore. You know, they're getting their rent paid by their insurance companies, and they're living in town. And so they've been displaced, and they're not up here. You know, after the fire, it was really dark up here at night. A lot of houses were gone. Electricity was off for a couple weeks. It was very quiet, very different. And so for those who lost their homes, it was one experience. For those who didn't lose their homes, and as I said earlier, I didn't lose my home, and I am eternally grateful for that, the emotional strain has still been very difficult. And I think a lot of people don't understand or realize that the people who didn't lose their homes still had catastrophic loss. I'll just give you my personal experience. You know, I had half the value of my home in equity. I thought I was sitting pretty good. Our house was actually for sale at the time because we kind of have a little retirement plan that we were working toward, and included selling this home to use our equity to buy something smaller, you know. Well, all of our equity burned up. You know, our house, the assessor and my real estate agent tells me my house is worth half of what it was. I now owe more on it than it's worth. I had a lot of equity before the fire, and after the fire I have none. I have to refinance because, you know, my loan is going to run out here in a couple more months, and nobody will refinance it because I no longer have equity. And so, you know, even though I'm financially in good shape otherwise, me, along with many people up here, are dealing with, well, do I just throw my keys on the kitchen table and walk away and give the house back to the bank? Or do I try to deal with it? And that's a real emotional strain. So we're here for an indefinite period of time, having to deal with it. There are worse places to be than sunshine. I mean, we love it up here, and now the rebuilding effort has started. There are several homes that are almost nearing completion. I think our first 2 homes are going to be done in the next 30 days. And that's exciting to see. A lot of the burned areas are greening up. Some of them are going to be black for a long time. You know, there's this incessant, ongoing sound across the canyon of chainsaws cutting burned trees. And while it's sad on one hand, you know, there is, the phoenix is flying, you know, or we're going to come from these ashes. And that feels good. It's not as depressing. I would say for 3 months I cried every time I drove up past Bald Mountain into the old town site of Sunshine. But now there's kind of a rebirth happening. The people that have moved out are coming back little by little. Many of them are not going to come back. Many of them didn't get enough money from their insurance company to rebuild, even though they had replacement policies. The county is requiring pretty onerous rebuilding standards that seem to be raising the cost of rebuilding 30 to 35%, which for many people, almost everybody, it means building a smaller house than they lost. And some people can't rebuild at all. So that's been very, very difficult. There's no doubt that the demographics of Sunshine has changed. Right now it's very different. Not a lot, but a few people have moved out who didn't lose their homes have chosen to move out anyway because of the depressing view up here. And I can't say that's a wrong thing to do. And so they're renting their homes. So we have a lot of renters up here, a lot of new people on the roads, younger people. So the demographics are definitely different. But I suspect over the next year, some of those people are going to return. And eventually, I'm confident Sunshine will return to the vibrant community that it was before. I actually went to a couple little dinner parties, and in the last couple weeks, and the fire wasn't discussed once. And that's, I said to myself a couple months ago, if I can be in somebody else's home and we don't talk about the fire, and that happens more than once or twice in a row, I know we'll be on our way to healing. And that's actually starting to happen. So it's kind of nice that the fire isn't the #1 topic of discussion. And it's not the only thing we talk about anymore. And it's enjoyable to see that, we run into people or go see people who lost their homes, and you look at their faces and, you just see that they've turned the corner, the load is lifted, and they now have a plan for moving ahead. So that's encouraging. And I think Sunshine's just going to be the wonderful community it was before, and maybe even better in the years ahead.
You mentioned to me that people's perspective about firefighters is fairly unusual, at least from what I might have imagined.
Well, I started by saying that as a kid, I observed volunteer firefighters responding, and I never gave it a thought of who they were or why they were responding. And in retrospect, I think that's how most people respond. I think we have a mentality, both whether you're in town, out in the plains, or up in the mountains, that if there's an emergency, someone's going to respond. But the truth is, unless you volunteer, or unless someone like you volunteers, no one's going to respond. I could foresee a day, Sunshine's a very small district, and I could foresee a day when there aren't enough people to respond to an emergency. I think some people have this mindset that, these guys who volunteer, or women too, we have several women that volunteer in our group, they really get into this fire thing, it's their hobby, they really enjoy it, and in some way I kind of think they think, I'm doing them a favor by letting them respond to an emergency at my house or somebody else's house. I don't think they understand that that's not what motivates us. What motivates us is no one else is going to respond if we don't. And so when you call 911, it's your next door neighbor who's going to come and answer that call. And I think if people realize that, they'd have a totally different perspective, both of emergency services in Boulder County and also their responsibility to their community.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for telling us your story.
Thank you.